So, starting off, we're introduced to this preacher, and it is apparent that he is charismatic and knows how to work a room as well as a bank account. What were your thoughts about playing a man of the cloth that also has an interest in, the business of spirituality?
Well, like I said earlier, when I get the call, I read the script and I think, I always like to try to play interesting characters, and this guy is quite interesting, the dilemma between being a spiritual man and also, needing the money and being a bit capitalistic. So it's kind of quite a dilemma. But I also, want people to understand when you start, when you do a TV series, characters build arcs. And this guy may start out one way, and over a course of maybe season five and season six and seven and eight, you may see him make a total transformation. So you always started out kind of like in the murky area, and then you build on that character as writers and producers. So we'll see what Pastor Coleman goes after this.
True, true. He tells Lucille richness comes in many forms, and we're not ashamed to put ours on display for the Lord, which
Mhm.
kind of reminded me of the old preacher back in the day, Reverend Ike, how he talks about circulating the money and things of that nature. So, in your opinion, is he a true believer or is he just a master salesman?
I think he's a bit of both. Pastors lead a kind of weird, kind of interesting balance to being a pastor. And if you're not super grounded in discipline in the spiritual, it can take you for a kind of weird ride, because you have so much power in terms of your voice and your charisma, your presence. So you have to really be careful with that. And I think, Pastor Coleman, we see one slice of him in this episode three that I'm in on June 20th, which is episode three on BMF. So we'll just have to see where he goes from this episode and how he evolves and how he grows. But it's a slippery slope.
He talks to Lucille about seeing a light in her and, that he could change her from a church mouse to bigger things, right? And when she says she's a pastor, he seemed a little taken aback. Was it because did he really see a light in her, or is that part of, making your flock feel the power of the word?
Well, um, like I said, when you're a pastor, you have a lot of power and people hang on your every word. And pastor's a charmer too, A pastor's job, if you run a big church, is to get more people in the church. And you sweet talk them, you do whatever you can. Of course, he has posters of himself in the lobby. He has an ATM machine in the lobby. He's throwing money around the church. I don't think he's all bad. I think part of that is just for show. But I also think, in a TV series, he may start this way in season one, and by season three or four or season five or six, he may have made a transformation. Somebody might have brought it to his attention that he's a little too over the top. So we just have to see where this guy goes. But I think it's a combination of charm and hustle.
So at this time period, he brought up a good point that opulence attracts people, and you reach more people. You got to get them how you can get them, so to speak. And we know that this is a church where there's celebrities, there's athletes in attendance. Does that alter how he presents his message, or how he presents himself, because he feels that he must be a light to attract more light?
Well, I think he leads with his charisma. I think he knows he's an amazing preacher. Preachers, good preachers are, effective and they get inside of your bones. So I think he has all of those tools. He's an old school pastor. He's been around and he knows how to charm. He knows how to, lay it on heavy. So it's all of that as a part of bringing people into the church, and I don't think he sees anything wrong with it. I think
So
he's a little over the top with the money, but money runs the world.
it does, it does. So also we see that, Meech gets word of Pastor Coleman's church from one of the people that he does business with.
Hmm.
And so, what are Pastor Coleman's views on that side of the life coming into his church, potentially, you know, tithing with that type of ties to the funds as well?
Well, I think in this episode, I don't know if we get a chance to unravel all of that. I think, the way Pastor Coleman, at least my interpretation, he's a pastor, and the more people in the church, the better. I got a new family here and come on in. And, maybe down the road as I learn what they're dealing with, maybe pastor may be on the fringes of it, or he may walk away from it. I think we see that if we came back in season 5 or 6, because as you know, in a TV series, there's going to be some conflict. So we don't know if Pastor Coleman will be in the middle of some of the things that Meach and those guys are doing and has to make a spiritual decision not to get involved. I'm not exactly sure.
What's the fun in playing a character like this? Like you said, that's charismatic, but believes in the word and is all flashy and brings all that spectacle to it.
Yes. Well, it's always fun when you can play a character that's kind of like a spectacle. And this guy is truly a spectacle. I can't listen, I've never played a pastor like this. I can preach and I'm trained and all of that, but he's pretty much over the top and he's pretty capitalistic. And so I'm anxious to see how this guy, how wild and crazy, because I know it was a wild and crazy day. Um, but I also think as we develop this guy, we'll see that some of that is show and some of it he's putting back into the community and he's doing some wonderful things inside the church and inside the community. I think he's a stand-up guy who just goes a little bit too far. He's a little over the top.
So, I mean, there's this thing that, the kids say righteousness and ratchet can exist in the same space. Is that sort of where we are when we meet Pastor Coleman and we look at what is happening with the flock and the money and all of these things, that it's just, leveling where Atlanta is at this time is 96. The Olympics are headed here. And, it's a bustling city for Black people and Black excellence.
Well, I don't think Pastor Coleman is exploiting that. I think he understands the trend. It's like being a musician. If you did funk and now funk is out, you got to recreate and try to get some funk and disco in there somewhere. So I think Pastor Coleman is a smart pastor. I think he understands he probably came out of the streets. I don't know his whole backstory, but I'm sure he came out of the streets if you watch him preach. He's been around, he went to seminary school, but he understands that this new generation, you got to have money to run a church and do the things that he may want to do in the community. I think, maybe his style is a little, more flamboyant than we would like, but I think he's grounded. I think he's a good guy. But I think, like I said, we'll see episode 5 and 6, I mean season 6 and 7, where this guy develops and where how he the arc that he takes, so to speak.
So we know that Lucille is new in her walk on this side of faith as, presenting to her congregation.
Hmm. Hmm.
Is he someone that she can trust?
I think so. I think Pastor Coleman is very sincere in his religious, posture and his stance. But again, you can't run a big church without money. I think can go to your head. I think anytime you're in a place of power, you have to make sure that you on the right side of right. And I think we may see that as it unfolds. But I think, especially Lucille, she buys into it a bit, so we'll see how it goes.